First, let me thank John and Josh, because without them, we'd have nothing up here. We said a lot, but they actually recorded it for us. In question one, how spaces differ, we didn't actually talk about how they differed, but what we want in teaching and learning spaces. We want it to be led by the needs of the curriculum, which are different on every campus. So what that means at Dartmouth will be different from what that means at Maryland. Although teaching and learning in the arts have a wide range of methods of delivery, we actually focused on rehearsal and hands-on teaching and not so much on lecture formats, which we believe could happen here or anywhere else on campus. We spent a lot of time talking about time. And one of the issues was in spaces that are shared, time spent on setting up and breaking down takes time away from the actual teaching activity. And so we'll talk more about that later. There was a little bit of concern that perhaps we were asking for specific space for every ensemble, but in fact we are talking about dedicated spaces for disciplines, so that a large ensemble room that would work for instrumental music would be shared by a number of ensembles, and one that is used by vocal music would be shared by vocal ensembles. We spent some time talking about the importance of the teaching and learning facilities in recruiting students and faculty, and that we really have to have facilities that attract people who want to be here. And again, we talked about time constraints. Question two. Oh, it's the time-honored verities. Yeah. We believe in appropriate infrastructure is critical, and knowing that we can't predict what will happen in technology, things like the size of conduit to allow for changes in delivery of technology are more important than the technology itself in this process. We talked a lot about the experience most of us have had on campuses of lack of maintenance and upgrading of technologies, and that in fact, in a space like this, we have to plan for the ability to maintain and upgrade our technology. Acoustical performance is something that came up in lots of sessions. We talked about it both as sound isolation and sound absorption. And I asked John, I said, well, you know, we can solve these problems, can't we? And he said, sure, all it takes is money. We too talked about light, when we want it, when we don't want it, both but in the teaching and learning spaces, there was a conversation about the need for natural light in studio arts, but not so much in our work. And I pointed out that in a costume shop, it's really important to be able to see fabric and color under natural light and not just under whatever we have in the room. And the final time-honored truth was that teaching in the arts requires human connection, and it can't just be about technology, and the more we can design spaces that will actually facilitate human connection, the better off we'll be. Question three. The trends. We too had trend issues. The trend toward documentation seemed important to us, and that in teaching and learning spaces, it's important to be able to document in multiple ways. The need for on-demand technology, the changes in the use of projection in the performing arts. At our place, we don't care so much about having the ability to build sets as we do about having appropriate technology to make projections. Like everyone else, we talked about interdisciplinary and interdepartmental connections. And there was some conversation about community-based learning and the efforts on campuses to reach out into the community. We weren't exactly sure how that was reflected on teaching and learning spaces on campus, but we thought it was important enough to mention as a trend. And finally, the advanced media and video sharing. It was great to have Sasha in our group. Where are you? back in the corner there. Because as we talked about various issues, as we talked about light, she said, well, don't forget that in media presentations, we don't want any light. And again, here, she was able to point out the importance of being able to do advanced media and video sharing. Question 4, physical manifestations. We too talked about flexibility. You know, the bad thing about being last is you say everything everyone else has already said. But we talked about flexibility in terms of being sure that when fixed spaces are dictated by the curriculum, they're available, and the changeovers, when they're necessary, be quick and easy. I don't think I need to say anything more about technology. Our conversation about transparency was all about questioning it. When is it useful? When is it not? When is it not? It has to be flexible. There was much skepticism expressed about the value and desire for transparency. There was also a conversation about what the impact of glass walls is on HVAC and maintenance. That assumptions are that it will all be taken care of, but we all know that's not true. We talked a lot about social spaces that would promote the active exchange between faculty members or among faculty members and between faculty members and students, so that the teaching and learning spaces were not just about classroom and rehearsal spaces. They were also about places where people can just run into each other. We thought it was really important that in these larger spaces that require equipment, that there be adequate storage in the space so that you don't have to get the timpani and move them up 3 floors and into the room and then finish rehearsal early so you can move them out of the room and back downstairs. AV systems were something we talked about briefly and thought was important, and we talked about HVAC a lot, and not just about whether it's warm or cold, but temperature and humidity control that is necessary for practicing the art form or maintaining the equipment, like pianos. Question 5, the result of it. We think good teaching and learning spaces result in deeper understanding of what's being taught and learned. We again talked about not just efficient use of time, but effective use of time. So we're not really just concerned about how quickly we move things in and out, but how we expand and contract in a system that, and in the academy, that has actually sort of fixed time constraints. We picked up on the phrase yesterday that someone talked about unexpected creative collisions, and really want to advocate on behalf of that, on proximity to assist in that. Expanded possibilities of creative ideas is our way of saying that we don't want to let ourselves self-limit and just decide we don't have it and therefore we aren't going to try it. That we want spaces that really allow us to think differently and think bigger. And although we all want lots of opportunities for interchange and transparency when it's appropriate, we think it's really important that there are opportunities for quiet and focus. Question number 6, other questions? Is there a point at which technology impedes teaching and learning and does not actually promote it? And what are those points and how do we manage them? The next one's not a question, but we put it up there anyway, which is that learning in the arts still takes time and face-to-face interaction. And finally, someone said, well, what are they doing in other parts of the world? What other countries and cultures offer us information from which we can learn? And question 7, specifically about the HOP. There is no question that there is need for more rehearsal space here, and more rehearsal space in the form of teaching space. We had the okay, now I can't find your name. Don, talking very passionately about the challenges for the jazz ensemble of rehearsal and how that spreads out over the semester. We think the interaction of different art forms is particularly important here, given the history of the hop. Again, we talked about sound bleeds and the necessity for a sound isolation to allow multiple things to happen at the same time. There was a plea for a lot of non-fixed seating in teaching and learning spaces. We too had questions about when is daylight important and when is it not, but where it is, we want to optimize the use of it. We repeat question transparency, and in addition to more rehearsal spaces, we were all quite sorry to hear that there are only 10 or 12 practice rooms, individual practice rooms in the building. And they are poorly ventilated and not sound isolated. So we would like to make a plea for more practice rooms. There was some talk about faculty offices as teaching studios. Some of us are in places where that's a common practice. Apparently it is not here, and we think that would be a good thing to consider. Small conference spaces for group learning. When we talked about storage, we wanted to be sure that people understood we are talking about active storage, highly organized things move in and out, and not a place to dump all the things that you don't want to throw away. And then there was a question, there's a desire to move the HOP administrative offices into this building. Was that an appropriate conversation for this group? What impact would it have on teaching and learning? And maybe this was my minority opinion, but nobody argued with it, that having the administrative staff in the building creates more opportunities for the staff to understand the needs of faculty and ensemble directors. And there's a thing that happens when you run into a faculty member in the lunch line, and they talk about what this space need has done to their teaching. So we would advocate for having the HOP offices in here, the administrative offices. We had a conversation about whether the maintenance of technology should be individual to the building or centralized somewhere else on campus. And there were strong opinions that the more it is individualized in the building, the better it's going to be. But at the same time, when it's somewhere else, it is generally, on this campus, I'm told, free and more available. And like some of the other groups, we talked about access to the building and the pros and cons of students having 24-hour access. That's it.
Great, fabulous.